we are a group of people who see the value in helping other people, and that value is measured not in the dollars in your bank account, but in the smile of the children, the families' faces.
Yeah, Hi and welcome everyone. Mark Henderson here, CEO of the AHI. Today we have Kim Sinclair, the CEO of C-Arms, joining us on our Industry Connect. Challenging time for Kim and her team, based out of Batemans Bay. Not only have they been hit with COVID-19 like the rest of the community has, but also the devastating bushfires that occurred over the summer. It takes strong leadership, it takes experience, it takes hard work, compassion, all those things to be a great leader. And I'm glad to be interviewing Kim today, certainly a great leader in our industry. Enjoy. All right, thanks, Kim. Thanks for joining us today on Industry Connect. It's great to have you. Kim, what's led you to C-Arms?
I've been here almost 2 years now. And I was approached by a recruiter who I had used in the past with our recruitment things to take a look at the role. It wasn't anything that had actually really stood out to me to apply for, but as I read more about it, I read more about the board members that were on there, and I became very interested. And so I moved from Canberra to Batemans Bay to take up the challenge, and I took it on the proviso that I had the full support of the board, being a non-Aboriginal person running an Aboriginal organisation. So I was very sensitive to those issues and needed to make sure I had full board support when I needed to go out into community and do the work, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you first started in the role, and maybe even just leading into the role, what did you think your biggest challenge was going to be, and has that changed over the 2 years?
I knew my biggest challenge would be being accepted by a community.
Mm-hmm.
I was less concerned about the logistical aspects of the role. I've been in community housing for a long time, and had been instrumental in being part of an executive team, and then finally the CEO of a Tier 1 affordable housing developer. So I knew what the challenge was in a business sense. The unknowns for me was community acceptance and getting and how quickly I could learn to understand the particular nuances of Aboriginal housing compared to mainstream community housing. And I think I had a bit of a head start there being Māori, that I would understand some of the challenges of community and kinship relationships and working in Aboriginal housing as opposed to mainstream.
And I would guess, Kim, that with all that being said, you would have been embraced very quickly by the community in Batemans Bay, New South Wales area, I would guess.
I think I was fairly fortunate that I did have a very good support network with the board and also the staff. Our aim is to employ Aboriginal people and provide opportunities. And I mean, that's one of the reasons I've joined C-Arms to AHI, we're a corporate member, is because I feel that all those opportunities we need to provide as a professional career path for our staff. And that has been the greatest challenge for me, is workforce and workforce development and workforce training, particularly being a regional provider where we have less opportunity, less of a recruitment pool. And the recruitment pool we have are coming from some very disadvantaged areas.
All right, we're going to Kim. That's thanks for sharing that about C-Arms. Tell me about you mentioned your Maori heritage. Mm-hmm. Tell us I read recently that you, at the sprightly age of 17, went into the Army Reserves in New Zealand. That must have been a big step for you.
Well, probably less so than for most people.
Yeah.
Both my parents were military. My dad first serving in the infantry battalion, and then as one of the first SAS soldiers in New Zealand. He met my mother in the army, and I had always been. Our home life was fairly disciplined in a really good way. Lots of structure, routine. And of course, that also, I was used to coaching. I'd been coached from the age of 7 in athletics, and made a New Zealand team when I was 10 and 11. So
Wow.
I think I was used to that sort of structure, and I loved it. So, and I stayed in with my particular unit. So originally it was a field hospital similar to MASH, and then transformed into a medical battalion. I had it was a fantastic opportunity. I feel very fortunate though that my period of service was fairly much conflict free,
Right.
in terms of where New Zealand was getting involved around the world. And it was only towards the end of my service that the bombing of Baghdad occurred, and we had team members flying over there. Wow. As part of the Ready Reaction Force. We did a number of training exercises, of course, going around to remote Māori areas and doing minor surgical procedures there to help with the health outcomes of the communities there. Yeah. And we also did a trip to Solomon Islands doing a Yaws eradication program. So they were great. But as I said, I feel fortunate. My sister and brother-in-law are still serving, and they've been to probably all of the serious theatres of war that have, in the last 20 years. Yeah. So that's a bit about that background and how I came into it, and our family, of course, is still fairly heavily involved in service in New Zealand.
I want to just to understand the Indigenous rights that people enjoy in New Zealand versus what you found when you came to Australia. Is there much difference in what you're seeing here in Australia than what you experienced in New Zealand?
Yes, there is. I was very shocked when I came to Australia and found it difficult to find out about Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal history. Coming from New Zealand, my children were part of the Te Kilhanga Reo network, where it's an early childhood program that's run out nationally and paid by a national trust for kids to go to early childcare centres that are based on tikanga Māori. So that's where you learn about your culture, you learn language, not just for the children, but also for parents coming in. And coming to Australia and finding that wasn't the case here. And it's only been, I did work for the National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, the PEAK Secretariat, from 2005 to 2008. And that's when I began to learn what the actual systemic barriers were for the type of advantages that Māori had over Aboriginal people. And that became more so now that I've been working in Aboriginal housing, as I start unpacking, why is Aboriginal housing now at a space where mainstream was 10 years ago, just getting into nourish, so that we can take advantage of the opportunities already provided to mainstream, and unpacking the legislation around that and doing research on the systemic racism, I suppose, and the discrimination. That was the theme of the article I wrote for the Housing Works.
Yeah, Kim, I could imagine, therefore, in your role at Sea Arms, with your experience in New Zealand, that some of the transformational change that could happen in the sector, you could advance quite quickly because you've already seen it. Would that be fair?
I think I have a better understanding. I always need to, the main difference I've found is that it's more difficult to get consensus because geographically Australia is larger. The kinship relationships are very tight and very linked to specific parts of country, whereas Māori have had a united front and united force while maintaining their individual tribal identities, of course. But we've also had the benefit of the Waitangi from in the 1800s that have helped not necessarily stem all of the systemic discrimination, but has helped avenues to redress that. Whereas that's more difficult here in Australia for Aboriginal First Nations people.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a webinar earlier in the week around homelessness and the homelessness challenge that we see in Australia generally and across New Zealand, 150,000 people homeless, but the high rates of homelessness within Indigenous communities far outweighs any other community, and it's an area that needs constant focus, and people like yourselves spending your time and experience helping to resolve and solve. Kim, you mentioned kinship. Now, I understand kinship was a real catalyst for you to come to Australia.
Yes. So my husband at the time had never really had a relationship with his biological father. So we had pulled up stumps in New Zealand for him to come and do that. And for me, that was something that I had arranged once we had our daughter. For us, family is really important, and understanding where you come from, who you come from, is an important part of whanaungatanga, which is, it's greater than just your immediate family. It's your extended family and all of your ancestors that you've come from. So that's what actually brought me to Australia, was to assist my husband at the time to rekindle and reconnect with his biological father. Yeah.
And Kim, I understand that your transition, and I hope you don't mind me asking the question, your transition into Australia, into the community, wasn't necessarily a smooth one. You found yourself almost on the brink of homelessness at one stage.
Yes, and I think it's no different to most family breakups where, if the woman has the children, it's very difficult unless she's got financial support to maintain households or maintain housing. And that was, no different for me. The only difference, of course, was being a Kiwi citizen here, not eligible for any single parenting. So following my separation, and it was an amicable separation,
yeah.
My 3 young children and I were briefly homeless while we waited to take up residence, fortunately, in a friend's farm cottage down in Michelego.
Yep.
So how we worked that was in return for doing up the cottage. So we went in, there was no water, no bath, no plumbing. So I dug a little long drop out the back, and we went to the toilet in the bucket and emptied that until we could get a water tank installed and the plumbing into the bathroom. Yeah. So it was only a period of maybe, say, 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah. And so I just pretended the kids were camping on the floor.
Wow.
As it's snowing outside and the wind's coming through the floorboards.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Kim, the reason why I asked that story, you recently spoke at one of our events, the International Women's Day event, and you talked about some of the challenges with women in leadership and some of the things that you have to face as a woman leader. The reason why I wanted to ask you the question about your time in Michelego, and I absolute respect that you've dug a long drop in the backyard. It's a fair effort. All those kind of experiences must have shaped you into the leader that you've become. Would that be fair? And what is it about those experiences that gives you the energy and the focus to do your job?
Yeah, that is actually a fair and a true comment for myself. I feel I learn from every experience. I always like to try and understand, how did I get to this point, and what am I learning from it? Were there any other options that I didn't see back then? So I do go and do a self-review of where I am. At the, you know, with those sorts of things, you know, there's very limited options. I learned that as a woman who has to look after children, or even if it's a single male parent, it's very difficult trying to meet all the government requirements in terms of finding work while you're trying to maintain a young household and get kids off to school. I've learned that workplaces aren't necessarily family friendly. And that a lot of the stuff that you need to do, you need to find flexible working arrangements. And I think that shaped me when I became CEO, in reviewing all of our HR policies, making sure that where necessary there was flexibility, understanding that our employees had issues like domestic violence going on in their lives, custody battles, all of these things that required a little bit more understanding from me as an employer. I was pleased to be able to put in place employee health and wellbeing programs and a chill out room and you know, for staff to come to. Because working in the housing sector, you need to be resilient. You need to be non-judgmental to do a really good job and to really be able to help people. It's a bit of a conflict in that you also have to enforce rent collection, for example, knowing that people are having a number of other household issues that are impacting on their ability to do that. And trying to find a pathway for them through that. So I think everything that I've experienced has helped me both in terms of shaping service delivery, but also in being an employer who can help truly develop a workforce and help them meet their potential.
Yeah, and Kim, as a leader, how do you describe, if someone was to ask, you know, Kim, what kind of leader are you? I mean, how do you respond?
I think I am clear in the standards that I expect, but I'm also very clear in what I, as a leader, and therefore as a CEO, what an organisation will do to support people to meet those standards. I think people would say I'm fair. I'm transparent in my leadership. I don't change things around. It's the same rule for everybody. And the greatest outcome, I think, would be, is seeing people develop to their best potential, because then that just helps our organisation be the best. So it's, we'll help you if you're struggling. You need to get to this certain point though, because, we need to provide service standard or the service delivery to our clients.
Yeah, and it sounds like, and it's no different to some of the other people that we've interviewed through our Industry Connect webinars, compassion plays a fairly big role in our sector. That be fair?
Absolutely. And so it's a way of, there's a lot of bureaucracy in our sector. There's a lot of, I'm amazed, maybe not so much nowadays, but back when I first started, what people had to supply as evidence for eligibility, I used to say, this is ridiculous. This is more than what I would supply a bank for a mortgage. Yeah. And unfortunately, that still goes on. There's a lot of what I would call entry barriers, and particularly working in the Aboriginal sector, where you've got to have a fairly high level of resilience to engage with Centrelink, to engage with all the forms and requirements that they ask you to meet. And these are people that are asking to do that with very limited means themselves. Working regionally, there's limited access to the internet. So, you know, there's a heavy reliance on phones. Phones cost money. You know, all of these things I'm aware of when we're doing our service delivery, and we're always trying to find new ways to stay connected and to assist our clients meet some of those external requirements that impact on their ability to pay their rent.
Yeah, and Kim, we often talk in the sector about creating an interest or an attractability of the sector for people looking for a career. Let me just ask you if there's a young woman looking at a career, or a young man, but let's say a young woman looking for a career, and she's thinking about housing. Why would you advise her to enter this industry?
I would say to anyone entering into the industry, first of all, make sure that you're doing it to make a difference. It's not, particularly in these smaller organisations, they're not roles that you can get away with just turning up and doing a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Because that's not going to sustain you when you're hitting the tough challenges. And your resilience will come from the depth of your passion. Yeah. For women, young women entering the sector, I think it's one of the best sectors to carve a career out of, because you can go so many ways. I've referred to in the past, the community housing sector is heavily regulated. So you can go from anywhere from the frontline forward-facing roles, such as a housing officer or a support pathways person, right through to finance. Compliance is huge, through up into those executive roles. Yeah. And, you know, when I first started in the sector, I was engaged as a finance and admin manager, and, you know, within 6 months I was the CFO and deputy CEO. Yeah. So, you know, you will get out of it what you put into it. And if you put it in with an intent to follow your passion, I think it's not, you know, you could be whatever you want to be within the sector. And that's not just Australia or, you know, New Zealand. Once you have an understanding of it, you can, you know, it's a global situation that affects everyone. And I'm really a proponent of housing first, that would make a difference for people's education or employment outcomes and health.
Yeah, and I think, Kim, we're starting to see some silver lining coming out of this current crisis, COVID-19 crisis that we're in. The New South Wales government today have advised the sector that they're going to be putting a fair bit of their stimulus money into some new housing initiatives. So we should start to see, we hope, some real drive and energy being put into the sector, and perhaps that's where the opportunities are going to rise for people with ambition or looking for a career.
Well, and that's probably an aspect that I really didn't talk about, but coming from a affordable housing developer, where we actually developed and sold to the open market and then retained as well, being part of that, the post-GFC and the nation building stimulus program that put out, you know, we're already flagging that construction and particularly investment by the governments at all levels in housing is going to be a great way for economic stimulus post-COVID. Yeah. So we're trying to get our ducks in a row and our redevelopment plans progressed to a stage where they'll be ready to present for funding opportunities in the future.
Yeah. Kim, you mentioned earlier about AHI corporate membership. As you know, we've just launched our new membership model, which provides some real benefits to corporates. You were the first organisation who put their hand up and said, yeah, we're committed to that. So all credit to you, and we thank you for that very much. But why, Kim? Why for Sea Arms?
It's aligned perfectly with our strategic plan and our vision for our workforce. Right. We are committed that our particularly our Aboriginal workforce and potential Aboriginal workforce in our areas can see that there is a clear investment, that we put our money where our mouth is, and that we provide really high-level opportunities for them to advance in their own development, professional development. We've taken advantage of the Wednesday series. We've had all the staff on. It's also a great way of us connecting and sharing a professional development experience that we can get to talk about when we go offline. Yeah. So, it's just, I think it's critical. And with, AHI for me and, with my experience over the decade or so I've been involved with community housing, has always been a provider of those really high-level professional training opportunities. And I think that's just, I wouldn't think to go anywhere else, quite frankly, in terms of getting our workforce engaged and given the opportunity to be part of.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kim, and thanks for that feedback. And let me reiterate that that was an unscripted question and an unscripted answer. So I really appreciate your support in what we're trying to do. And again, we will continue to interact with your team and give them opportunities to continue to develop. But that's great. Now, Kim, it would be remiss of me not to ask you some pretty curly questions. It'd be easy for me to ask some curly Australian v New Zealand type question. You used an analogy before about you took up stumps to come to Australia. Yes. Hopefully you follow the Australian cricket team after pulling up stumps, because the New Zealand one's a little bit ordinary, I must say, but I don't want to offend anyone.
Look, I'm too busy during summer to watch any sort of that type of sport.
Right.
My preference is winter, and when I can watch the All Blacks.
Yeah. Now, what a phenomenal organisation that is, the All Blacks. Now, just some quick questions just to finish off our interview today, and we really appreciate your time, Kim. I know how busy you are at the moment. When I say texting or talking, Kim, preference?
Talking.
Best day of the week?
Wednesday.
We need to know why Wednesday, Kim.
Because it's the middle of the week. So, Monday is my list of going through everything I need to do. Wednesday, I get to have a look and say, "Oh, I've achieved a bit of that, and I've got that left to go." So,
a bit of a pause in the week.
Yes,
I did share with one of my previous interviews with Sean Kelly, who sits on the board of AHI, that my best day of the week is Monday. So he thought it was an appeal to the member of the board that I'm doing a good job. So it wasn't. I'm just trying to convince myself not to get Mondayitis. Kim, the nickname your parents called you growing up?
Nickname they called me growing up?
Yeah.
I got a lot of derivatives of Kimbo because my name's so short. People couldn't shorten it any further, so they added things to it.
Right.
So Kimbo or Kimba.
Kimba. So Kim, you'd be comfortable with us introducing you at one of our, say, seminars or workshops in the future where you come and speak as Kimbo? Would that work for you?
Yeah. Kimbo or Kimba, doesn't
Kimba. Okay, got it. Kim, you go for a long drive in the car once we're out of lockdown. You go for a long drive in the car. What's your go-to song?
Oh, my go-to song in the car is at the moment, I've got to say, look, I'm heavily influenced by my grandson, so we do a lot of driving together. So at the moment, it's Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man.
Oh, lovely. Fantastic. Kim, Russell Crowe, Kiwi or Aussie?
Kiwi. He used to walk down past my place in his days.
Yeah, fantastic.
There's a girlfriend down the road.
There's a number of Australians who will watch this video who will sigh with relief that you've made that call. Thank you very much. Now, Kim, I would ask you to say "G'day, mate" in an Australian accent. I did ask Sean Kelly of that, who's Irish, last week, and he declined the opportunity and the offer.
Really?
You can decline if you like.
Well, I get caught between, so I'd like to hear people's feedback actually, because when I go home to New Zealand, they say I sound like an Aussie, but here people say you still got a Kiwi accent. So I'll do my best. I'll do a g'day, mate.
Kim, I think if we were giving out awards, you would have won one right then. So, Kim Sinclair, the CEO of C-ARMS, I want to say thank you, Kim, for your time today. Again, I know it's a really, really busy time. You've got a lot going on in your organisation. So thank you so much for being part of our Industry Connect. And we look forward to seeing more and hearing more about the work that you're doing over there in New South Wales.
Kia ora koutou, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Kim.